Perfection is to let the world be perfect as it is already. Perfection is a word for labeling any method that perfectly produces an ideal result, reliably, consistently, faithfully. Different ideal results will correspond to different perfect methods for producing each particular valued result. Perfection is about relevance or precision, reliability, faithfulness, that kind of thing. Be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. It's an English translation of a very old saying from the New Testament of the Judeo-Christian tradition there. What does be perfect mean? Be perfect simply means to fully accept yourself and everything else, completely, precisely as it is already. This is similar to be still, or be calm, or be pure, or be whole, or surrender, or relax. Be perfect. Be as you are. Be perfect. Can you name one actual pattern that is totally impossible to accept? Any pattern that can be named or even just witnessed must be possible to accept as an actual pattern, as a possibility. This is all very simple logic. Anything that can be conceived can be accepted without condemnation or distress or criticism or any additional comment. No words are required. Anything that can be perceived can be perceived. For example, if you notice that you've been rejecting or condemning some pattern in yourself or others, being perfect would mean totally accepting that activity of rejecting or condemning. Rejecting rejection is, ironically, the perpetuating of the process of rejection. Rejecting anything is rejection, so rejecting rejection is still rejection, right? Further, that's the absolute pinnacle of hypocrisy and vanity, though it is still the easiest thing in the world to simply accept the hypocritical rejecting of rejection. How do you accept it? Notice it, and don't do anything else, just notice it. All right. Being perfect contrasts completely with the idea of becoming perfect. The idea of using allegedly perfect methods to allegedly become perfect is an innocent mistake, a futile error, confused delusion, sin, anxiety, hysteria, and the linguistic foundation for mental illness, as in distress and shame. If one believes that one is not already perfect, only then is it possible to conceive of becoming perfect. If one believes one is imperfect, if one rejects or condemns some aspect of oneself, then one may believe in the idea of a method to become perfect, eventually, maybe, possibly, hypothetically, if everything goes right, nobody ruins it, and, all that. There's that original belief or original presumption or original sin of a rejection, a sense of imperfection, which means rejecting or condemning some aspect of oneself. That guilt or shame is the foundation of a whole mess of symptoms, and that karma has certain consequences that allow for the resolving of the karma or the releasing of the karma or the dropping of the momentum, the dissolving of the momentum of that karmic distressful motivation to fix the imperfect thing that's rejected. Why is it rejected? Well, it doesn't really matter. If there's that core rejection or condemnation of some aspect of life and some aspect of one's own life and oneself, there's a ripple effect that goes along with that. So if one believes that one is imperfect, if one maybe doesn't say it, but insists and presumes and is totally convinced that one is imperfect, then one may agonize over finding some method or methods that may finally work to become perfect. That system of believing and agonizing is called hell. That's what I'm calling it, hell. It's rooted in the idea of imperfection, of an original sin, of an intrinsic shame, a shame that cannot be redeemed, it can't be forgiven, it can't be compensated for. That's the presumption, and yet there's this desperate, hysterical drive to compensate and to relieve that sense of shame. And if there's that core idea of imperfection and original sin and something shameful, then that is a possible foundation for another branch of that same tree of shame, which is who's to blame for being guilty for that intrinsic shame? Who to avoid? The people who, if I'm guilty about a certain kind of pleasure or arousal, well, then I avoid people who stimulate me in that way. It's overwhelming. It's disturbing. Naturally, I would avoid them. I would call them evil or vile or whatever I would do, or I would simply ignore them. I'd want to criminalize and ban and boycott and whatever, and that's completely natural. If there's that sense of disturbance or shame or fear or terror or panic, then there's a number of outcomes that go with that. Envy and panic are the signals of that process or that foundation. Envy means somebody else has what I want. Why do I want that other thing? Well, because it'll make me become perfect. That's the implicit thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with envy, by the way. There's nothing wrong with panic. There's nothing wrong with shame and this idea of imperfection. In a sense of morally wrong. It's actually the foundation of a bunch of morality. Morality comes from this presumption of something being intrinsically right and something being intrinsically wrong, as distinct from all things are perfect just as they are. So envy is a form of distress. Let's use that terminology. I think that'll be something that people can accept. And this is about acceptance. So if one rejects or condemns, in contrast to accepting, if one rejects or condemns some aspect of reality as fundamentally imperfect, that is still rejecting reality, as in denial. Denial is rejecting reality. Rejecting reality is denial. That is a projection of rejecting some pattern of oneself. When I say out there in the world or that other person shouldn't be like that, that's a projection of an inner sense that I shouldn't be like a certain way. Life shouldn't be like that. So when I start to find instances and examples outside of me to condemn and reject and destroy or whatever, to fix, to prevent, those all are branches that correspond to certain trunk, certain roots, certain sense of distress. So the reflexive, like a reflex, the reflexive rejection of one's own fear would automatically result in rejecting any pattern that one finds terrifying or disturbing. It doesn't need to be really dangerous, but if I experience real fear and I'm easily disturbed and easily upset, if I'm operating in a sense, in a mode of kind of baseline disturbance, baseline mental disturbance, baseline anxiety, baseline hormonal panic, if I have that sense of hormonal imbalance or that sense of panic, that corresponds to the biochemistry of a hormonal instability. And when I have that sense of kind of a moderate desperation that anything can easily disturb me, we can call it irritable. We can call it nothing, but when I'm irritable, that's when I'm going to push things away, reject things, attack things, defend from things, condemn things. So if one rejects fear, then one must reject all frightening patterns as disgusting and disturbing, for those frightening patterns reveal the alleged shame of one's own fear. If I'm ashamed of fear, then anything that causes me fear causes me to be confronted with my own pre-existing shame. And I'm not going to like that. I want to avoid those things. Turn away from evil. Turn away from that which disturbs you. That's good advice. Totally natural. However, if one accepts fear, then there is no pattern to reactively condemn or reject as too frightening. If one completely accepts fear, then there's nothing too frightening. Doesn't mean there won't be something startling in a particular moment. Something can be startling. Something can be disturbing. But I can have spontaneous disturbance. That's different from having an idea about something to avoid or prevent because I think it might disturb me, which is basically anxiety, agonizing, paranoia already. If I'm thinking about, here's 26 things that I want to avoid and prevent, that takes a lot of energy. That's paranoia. If one accepts fear as a valid emotion and response, and one accepts shame, then there's no pattern to reactively condemn or reject as too frightening or too shameful. There's shame arises, but I don't have to have this ongoing inhibition. Doesn't mean I need to do anything in particular either. It's not condoning anything to say I'm not going to be preoccupied with avoiding it or with attacking it, condemning it, and preventing it. And there may be things that it's really, functional to avoid and prevent at a certain stage in time. There may be 6 things, 26 things, or nothing. Nothing that needs to be avoided. And so there's a possibility of a tremendous freedom when there's nothing in particular that we need to be preoccupied about avoiding or condemning. So beware of those who condemn fear. Be cautious about them. Fear them. They may say paranoid, illogical things like, the only thing to fear is fear itself. They promote paranoia and shame. However sincerely and innocently, the only thing to fear is fear itself. That's paranoia. So some who fear reality or some aspect of reality might also condemn certain churches or other institutions for promoting the idea of original sin. However, what if those churches are in fact just promoting an awareness of the idea, of the human experience? Or what if that was the original intent and maybe it got obscured? But what if those churches are, however effectively, however perfectly, what if they're promoting an awareness of the